Hello and good evening. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Sharad Kutan.
You're watching Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Every year on July 30th marks the International Day Against Trafficking in Persons. So the theme this year is, it focuses on first responders, helping to end the crime of human trafficking. Now, these include social workers, labor inspectors, law enforcement officers, healthcare workers and NGO staff, all of whom help to identify victims, help them on their path to justice and in rebuilding their lives. Now, joining us in the studio tonight to help us better understand the very complex issues that underlie and allow for trafficking in persons, we have Aegile Fernandez, the director at the workers' rights-based NGO Tenaga Nita, and Associate Professor Dr. Jatswan Singh. He is the Executive Director at the Asia Europe Institute at University of Malaya. Welcome to the show. It's really good to have you both here. So let's talk about this day, the International Day Against Trafficking in Persons. This year's theme focusing on frontliners. Aegile, you're a frontliner. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about why it's important to recognize the work that frontliners do in trying to end the crime of trafficking.
Right. I think for me, in the whole area of the work of trafficking, it's an NGO person or a civil society person who is the first person who comes into contact with the victim, right? And knowing and identifying the victim and then taking through the process of a fair, just system that we will have. So you are there from the first step of meeting the victim right to the time when you send the victim back home safely.
Aegile, can I ask you, I mean, this has been a long journey for you and of course your sister Irene. You know, has the work of activists become easier? You know, the bad old days when activists were often seen as the problem by government, has that changed?
Not really. It has become even harder, I think, and that is because you now have to deal with the word freedom, the right to speak, the right for the victim to attain that justice system. I think there are more barriers, and that makes it harder for us day by day to pass that barriers and to get that justice system going. We are also dealing now with a bigger global issue.
Right, yes. And that's precisely true because, you know, trafficking in persons is not just happening, it doesn't happen within one country, it's international borders, it's a regional problem. And Jatswan, you've done some work looking at this. I'm wondering if you could help set the scene, kind of the context as to the nature of the problem, how prevalent is the problem in Malaysia? Are we a source, a country for human trafficking? Are we a transit, or are we the destination?
First and foremost, the issue here is to look at human trafficking on a global scale, right? Not really on a regional scale, but because it's a global phenomenon. We are not talking about human trafficking in Asia alone. We're also talking about human trafficking in parts of the world which are highly developed. In Europe, for example, right. Victims being trafficked from Eastern Europe into Western parts of Europe. So it's a global problem that we are dealing with, right? And of course, at the regional level, right, we also have the problem here, but the very nature of it is it's transnational. And when we talk about human trafficking being transnational, we are talking about who are behind this, who is behind this problem. And of course, a major issue here is to understand the issue of transnational crime or transnational criminal organizations that operate at a global scale. Of course, with their regional and local counterparts, but we are talking about a huge web here, right? And human trafficking here is just one aspect of transnational crime here.
It's very interesting. Jatswan, could you help us understand the emergence of the idea of human trafficking? It wasn't in the lexicon, I think, in the early 80s. But tell us, what is that history? Why did it emerge as a category to be focused on and to be named?
Okay, human trafficking to some extent has always been there. Slavery, if we go back to the earlier centuries and things like that, slavery was human trafficking. People were taken against their own will, right? But with the end of the Cold War and the explosion of transnational crime, this problem became even worse. So there was this need to differentiate between smuggling and trafficking. That was the very issue that was raised. And of course, in 1994, we get the UNDP coming up with this whole idea of human security. Are human societies protected well enough? Have we been talking about the right area of security or the wrong area of security? We often neglect human societies when we talk about security. We focus on state security. So millions of people, of course, there has always been talk in economics about poverty and things like that, but the issue of vulnerability, vulnerable people. So this is where this idea of protecting vulnerable people came about.
Sorry, could you help me understand the difference between human smuggling and human trafficking?
Okay.
In my mind, it's one and the same, but it's not, is it?
Okay.
Jatswan?
That's actually a very thin line. I mean, human smuggling is where a person would like to be smuggled into across the national boundary, right?
Oh, willingly?
Willingly.
Willingly, okay.
Right.
So,
But in the process, the same person can be a victim of human trafficking,
Right.
because smuggling would also entail costs, right?
And this is what we saw at Wang Kalian, right?
Yeah.
Because people
Yeah.
voluntarily wanting to come into the country, then being extorted and then terrorized in that
Yes.
process. Right?
If I may add on the 1 Kilian case, I just completed an article on that. No, that's very interesting, because when you go back to the source here, you're talking about the Rohingyas. And we all know that the conflict is pushing the Rohingyas out of Burma, Myanmar, right? Now, more often than not, these people actually make their way from the Arakan state to international waters. In international waters, they're actually picked up by smuggle-stroke traffickers, who actually bring them to some areas in Thailand and all that, keep them, and then of course they are only released when they pay a minimum of US $2,000, right? Those who do not pay apparently were left to die and things like that, or even are sold. So this is just one areas, one routes that we are talking about, right? So and what is the major problem here? Actually, it's a conflict in that part of Southeast Asia.
all right, we're going to take a quick break, but let's continue this conversation. There's a lot to unpack here. Stay tuned to Consider This. Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris. With me is Sharad Kutan, and we're speaking tonight to Aegile Fernandez from Tenaga Nita, as well as Jatswan Singh from the Asia Europe Institute at University Malaya. Now, coming to just follow on with our conversation before the break about trafficking and smuggling. There are many different types of trafficking, and I'm just wondering whether there is consensus in the understanding of what trafficking constitutes. Aegile, do we have an agreement as to what that definition is?
I think first of all, I think most Malaysians or many people, when you ask Malaysians, you ask them what is human trafficking, they're quick to say, okay, sex,
Okay.
work, prostitution. But there are much more which we have in Malaysia, and I just want to run through a few.
Sure.
That we have, first of all, child trafficking, and within child trafficking, we have labor, we have sex trafficking, we have begging, we have child marriages. So that alone is this thing. Then we go further, we have sex trafficking, buying and selling and pushing forced prostitution, right? But the mindset is that these people are here to sell the bodies and to make money, which is not right. So they don't, so we have. Then we have labor trafficking, which is huge in Malaysia, because we are a destination country for migration. But very gray areas. Is it human trafficking? Is it labor violation? Is it to be charged under Immigration Act for not having the documents? So a lot of gray areas. We have mail order brides. We don't talk about it, but many women are brought here and married off to older men and then forced into prostitution. You know, and they have a different modus operandi now. They have cruise ships and, you know, to introduce you to your partner whom you want to choose. From the time when the olden days, we had photographs in a shop. You know that. Then we have baby selling.
Yeah.
Okay, baby selling is huge in Malaysia. Is it adoption? Is it in the hands of people in staff and doctors of clinics and hospitals who are part and parcel of the so-called exchange of money, you know, for especially unwed mothers and others. We have traffic fishermen. We have done 1,500 fishermen we have rescued all these years.
Trafficked fishermen?
Fishermen who are brought from ASEAN neighboring countries, brought into Bangkok. They are kidnapped, kept there and sold to the fishing boats for deep sea fishing. And these are young boys, young people from 12, 13 years old. And they have to fish in the sea for 3 years under harsh conditions. They only eat fish. If they are sick and they cannot revive, there's no medication, they are thrown overboard. And I can say this personally because we went to Sarawak area, we rescued fishermen, and the police wouldn't believe that there were bodies in River Raja, and that when they dived in, they found so many bodies under the sea. And so many families in, you know, miss their sons, they don't have. So these are real hard part. We have organ harvesting, which we saw very clearly in the Wangkalian situation, death camps, that the organs were harvested and they were left to die, they were buried in. Then there is this whole conflict and confusion about, no, only doctors can do organ harvesting. But we found out that they experienced people who just take, they know how to keep your kidney, eye or whatever it is, and you're left to die. But these are testimonies from those who have been in Wangkalian. Then again we have from organ harvesting we go into domestic workers in our very own household who are in private homes, who are kept in isolation, right, who are not paid for 3 years and 5 years, and then they send.
That is also considered human trafficking.
Trafficking,
But like it's almost in the immigration labor, sorry, it's almost like labor violations, right?
That's
like
right.
you said
That is
earlier.
why they're always charged under Immigration Act because they don't have the documents with them. So when they run to a police station for help, where's your passport? You don't have your passport. You are immediately arrested.
I want to ask, Jatswan, if you could jump in here about because of the complexity of the different cases in the list that Aegile has. It's a horrible list for starters, but what kind of data do we have? I mean, is there an agency in Malaysia, is there interest in government to document this and to understand the magnitude of the problem?
Yeah, we have the Majlis Anti Perdagangan, we have our legal instruments, we have the anti-human trafficking unit with the Royal Malaysian Police. So we have the mechanisms that have been created to address this issue, right? But the next thing is, are we doing enough? And do we really understand the complex nature, the complexity of the entire issue? Like as Aegile has just pointed out, it takes various forms, right from selling people literally to domestic servitude. And the definition is very, very clear. Going back to the question you raised earlier about whether we have a definition. There is a definition by the United Nations, and this is adopted by all countries. There are elements in the definition that clearly tells you what human trafficking is all about.
Well, okay, speaking about that definition, I want to come back to that. The US definition, there's a tiered ranking. Malaysia is on tier 2 of the watch list of the US Trafficking in Persons report that's released by the State Department. Is that the international benchmark or the ranking for how countries stand in terms of their response to the crimes in human trafficking? Is that where we should be looking at internationally?
It's a guide, I think, because we talk about cross-border and we talk about interventions. So the tier ranking gives you an idea of how serious in each country human trafficking is, across the borders, and it also helps you to understand victims coming into a destination country in Malaysia, what is like in the other country. Why are they being transported here and pushed in for different forms of trafficking? It also, I think, helps with the recommendations given to different countries. What are you making efforts to fight human trafficking or not? But we should not depend. We tend to depend a lot once a year when the ranking comes, and then we are all worked up and all. No, I think we should have our own standards, our own benchmark. Are we
Presumably
making
higher
efforts?
standards.
Yeah,
than
yes,
lower.
higher standards. You know, rather than all the years we are being on 2 watch list. In fact, this year we should be in tier 3, but there was a waiver, so we are in 2 watch list.
that's a waiver.
How long more? And as rightly Jatswan said, we are not having that commitment to fight.
Yeah, I mean, so that waiver again points to the kind of politicized nature of perhaps the US Department's own ranking system. I mean, just very quickly, how's your sense of the politics of this, in terms of interstate relationships and such?
Yes.
Okay, going back to this this tier thing, yeah, it's a good guide. The UN has a measurement as well. These are all measurements that can actually allow you to take stock of what you are doing and where your weaknesses lie. But addressing the issue of human trafficking requires transnational cooperation. Why? Because the victim probably originates from one country, is transited to another country, and is destined for a 3rd or 4th country. So you get victims being moved. Without cooperation from between states, it's simply impossible to tackle this issue, right? So government agencies at best look at proper border management, legal mechanisms and things like that. But what we have found in many countries, I'm not talking about specifically Malaysia, is a lot of countries stop short of criminalizing human trafficking rather than undertaking necessary measures to address root causes. So you can criminalize, you can say, okay, this is human trafficking, if we catch you, that's it, you go to jail for 10, 20 years, whatever. But I think you have to go beyond that, you have to get to the root causes. Why is it happening, from where, who is doing it, and all this requires transnational efforts.
Ooh, okay, that's going to be a difficult one to tackle. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back in a couple of minutes. Stay tuned to consider this. Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris, with me is Shiraj Kuttu. We're speaking to Aegile and Jatswan on today, the International Day Against Trafficking in Persons. Aegile, I want to ask you what justice looks like for the survivors of human trafficking. What does justice look like for them?
I think it's blind justice or black justice, I will say. I'm speaking as the voice of victims. They really don't get much support. And we can see, I'll give you a very good example of, there were 14 girls in agency for cleaning services, and of course they sought help, that they were, in such a situation, bad situation. They were then taken, they were documented by the police, a statement was taken, and you see. But at the end of the day, after the investigations, they were being charged under the Immigration Act.
So the girls were charged?
The girls were charged also under the Immigration. The agency was charged under the Immigration Act too, but they paid the $1,000 fine, and then RM1,000, and then that's it. But then that's guilty, right? But the girls were charged for not having the documents, for not processing their work permit.
So victims of trafficking get charged, penalized by the law.
So they pleaded not guilty in court. And When they pleaded not guilty, they were sent to the prison to wait for the trial, not guilty. 8 months passed by, no trial. They're suffering, languishing in prison. They are so tired, they're crying, they want to go home. And they'll be told, you just plead guilty and you go home. Is that justice? How does our justice system work? I think in a lot of our cases, they are not identified either as victims of trafficking or you're charged under the Immigration Act. And I think we need to wake up and we need to see, we say we are victim-centered. What does that mean, victim-centered? If we say we are victim-centered, we must have that empathy with the victim, right? We have to investigate properly. We have to see the people who are behind this. We have to be clear that they, whether they have a title, whether there's an institution, whether they are rich individuals, without fear or favor, you need to nab them. You need to put them behind bars.
So, Aegile,
not
so
the
you
victims.
point to basically what is the economics of this, right? The political economy of human trafficking, and they're clearly winners in it, and these are the people making money from the system. Jatswan, you said you've worked in the Sabah in that context and looking at trafficking there. Tell us a little bit about what's happening there and whether victims in those instances get justice and who are the beneficiaries of the current system.
Okay, first and foremost, when we talk about human trafficking, there's this also element of control, not just control over the victim, sometimes even control over the families. Now, more often than not, this is one element that we sometimes overlook. In many cases in Eastern Europe, for example, whilst girls are trafficked into Western Europe, mafias have control over families in their respective states, right? So this is an element that we don't really see very, very clearly. Now, going back to the issue on Sabah, again, my study was much focused on sex trafficking, and of course, the source here was either victims from within the state or outside the state, and catering for different levels within the sex industry.
Within Sabah.
In Sabah. And interestingly, catering for different clienteles, right? Okay, and again, as what was pointed out earlier, more often than not, you get raids, right, by immigration department, right, and charges levied are normally immigration charges, overstaying, coming without documents and things like that. But the root cause here is actually, why are these people here? You see my point?
So the police don't recognize the crime of trafficking. Is that what they're failing to see?
I won't say they don't recognize. I think it's the question of trained specialists in the field, on the ground, right? If you are going to send an enforcement officer who is trained in a particular area, he will look at a problem from his particular area. Right? This is where we need to broaden this whole idea of educating enforcement officers about the very, not just what is human trafficking, but the very nature of human trafficking. Look, this, you could undertake an immigration raid, but actually you are actually opening up Pandora's box, and that could be a human trafficking problem. We need to have that kind of training.
Okay, well, in the couple of minutes that we have left, I want to hear from both of you. What is it that we can learn from tonight? Because as Jatswan saying, it is an it's a transnational crime. It's linked to organized crime. What can Malaysia do to help eventually eradicate the crimes of human trafficking, Aegile?
I would, from here, speak to the people first, the public. I think they're very important. Let be enforcement, let be these are just people who carry out. The public, either they have the knowledge or they don't have the knowledge, but if they have the knowledge, there is a sense of fear.
The knowledge to...
Knowledge of human trafficking.
Of human trafficking.
That is something is happening 3 doors away or 4 doors away.
To identify
but
victims.
I mind my own business, because if I do report on that and all, I'm going to be in trouble, because there are endless processes that I have to undergo. I'll have to be interviewed. I will be seen as now I'm the perpetrator and not the perpetrator is someone else. So I think that is real fear. Also the fear to speak out openly, the freedom to say something. And I can see that in the people, but There are lots of people who are coming forward now, especially when it comes to domestic workers. We get a lot of calls from neighbors. We get a call, you know, from this thing, please rescue such and such a person, please help that person. And I think we go back to Adelina who died, you see, right? It was just too late by the time that the employers called, and you know, and we were with our staff, we were with her when she died at the hospital. But the state that she was in, it's something that we will never forget, and we cannot, to the public, I say, we cannot let something ever happen again.
So don't
in this
turn a
country.
blind eye.
Yes, don't turn a
Jatswan, very
blind
quickly, what do you think Malaysia can do to help eventually eradicate human trafficking?
I think that's the problem. The problem is sometimes we think what a state can do. You need collective effort. You need the global society to be aware that there is a problem here, and this is a transnational, it cuts across regions. You get people being trafficked from one region to the other, not just within the same region. Now the issue here is, are states doing enough to cooperate? Of course, at the United Nations level, we have got all the protocols, we have got all the mechanisms and things like that. But down at the regional level, is enough being done? Are states cooperating? Are they transparent enough to share information in the first place? Right? Okay, we get a lot of people moving. Let's be very clear about one thing, that we talk about Southeast Asia, we're talking about a very central region, a very porous region where you have got land boundaries and maritime boundaries. People move across these boundaries, right? And this is where human trafficking takes place. Now, one particular state, well, you can build the walls if you want to, but it's not going to stop human trafficking if the source country does not respond. So I think it needs global efforts. You need to educate people about the gravity and the seriousness of the crime of human trafficking as well.
Well, I hope we did our part a little bit in helping that conversation along. Thank you so much both for being here on the show tonight. That's all the time we have on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Sharad Kuttan, signing off the evening.
Thank you so much for watching, and good night.